So privacy rules are one of those things that when you're first starting out with Bubble, it's really easy to push it to one side because it's not really the exciting part, right? Like you're kind of in the mindset of trying to build this new app and create all this interesting creative logic and, create these interesting looking designs for your web pages, and privacy rules just feels like, that's some kind of security thing that I'll just figure out later. And in some respects, we have learned a lot of kind of core foundational stuff with Bubble before now encountering privacy rules. So that's true to some extent, but if you're going to be putting any apps out into the world that are going to be used by real people and not just little sandbox apps that you're using to learn with, then we just need to understand privacy rules. We need to be using privacy rules in all of our apps. This is not a nice to have. This is an essential part of your application because they are going to prevent your data leaking to the users who aren't supposed to see sensitive data. And it's not something that requires a lot of hacker technical expertise to work around. It's trivial to access data that you're not supposed to if you do not have privacy rules set up. So let me just demonstrate this to you so that you can see this for yourself. I've got a page here with only one thing on it, and that's a repeating group of users. Okay, this repeating group here, which is doing a search for users. Okay, that's all it's doing. And we have no privacy rules in our app. Now, all of these users, if I go into my database, you can see we've got a few fields here: address, date of birth. There's this manager user that's left over from the last time that we were using this task manager app. That's the app that we're playing with here. Okay, so address and date of birth, you can imagine, all right, that's not data that necessarily we want to show to other users, right? That's maybe something that's for admin eyes only, is the address and date of birth for a user. And in our database, you can see that these users all have an address and a date of birth filled in, okay? On the page, we're only showing the user's name. So your first thought might be, okay, well, we're only showing the user's name. So what's the problem? We're not showing the address, we're not showing the date of birth. So that seems to be secure, right? You'd be wrong, of course. Otherwise, we wouldn't need privacy rules. So to show you how easy it is for somebody to see data that they're not supposed to, I'm going to right click and inspect and show you that, in fact, the address and the date of birth fields for all of these users can be extracted, can be found. So you don't have to be an expert with Chrome DevTools here if you use this inspect tab, but you can follow along pretty easily. I'm going to come to the network tab. I'm just going to reload this page. This network tab is going to display essentially all of the packages that have been requested from the server. Okay, one of those packages, this one here, msearch, is the search for these users. This literal expression here, okay, that is returning a package of users from the database. And this is the package here, msearch. So what DevTools allows us to do is actually dig in and see what are the users that were returned in this search. What data do we have for each of those users? So I'm going to untwirl here the responses, okay, where it says total 4, okay, that means there's 4 total hits, 4 total kind of individual packets of data that were received here. So I can untwirl this a little bit more, and eventually I get here where I'm seeing essentially this 0 is Jason, this first guy, the 1 is Sarah, okay, and so on and so forth, okay. So I'm seeing here one packet for each of these users. And now I can go in one step further and I can see, okay, here's the ID for that user. One step further, boom. Look at all this information that I'm seeing. The date of birth, there's the address, okay? So all of the data associated with this user is now exposed to me. Their email address, right? And this might not be data that you want to display, right? You might only want your users to be able to see their own data, their own date of birth, their own address, okay? They shouldn't be able to see the sensitive information for other users. So it doesn't really matter which one of these I dig into, I can see all of the data here. There's the address for this user, for Peter, okay? So privacy rules prevent this from happening. Let's see how they work.
Hey guys, if you like this video, it is from my Bubble course, Think It, Build It. So go and check that out. There's obviously a lot more to learn when it comes to Bubble, and there's more videos, tutorials just like this in the course. I'll put the link in the description.
We're very familiar with this kind of schema by now, right? This is our database, right? This is the server, essentially where all of our data lives. Over here, we have our app. Okay, our app, or as we've discussed before, the client, right? I might say here, this is the client and this is the server, okay? So the client technically is your browser, the browser that your user is actually using to access this website, okay? But we can simplify it as database and app conceptually, okay? So your app, right, as we know, is doing this request to the database for some users, for some data. And the database, of course, database is full of all of this data like these users, okay? And the database is going to, based on the search constraints, the search parameters, return some users to the app, okay? Now, when it does this, right, when it returns these users, okay, when it returns the users to the app, this is one of those users, for example, it sends the user and all of its fields, right? All of the attributes for that user. Remember, a data type in Bubble, nothing more than a package of data. So that entire package gets sent. All of the little values, the name, the date of birth, the address in this example, gets sent through with that user to the app. And now the app might only need the name, right? It might only have kind of like a field over here, which is going to display the user's name, let's say, right? The user's name. But these guys, these other fields are still there. As we've seen, they're not being made visible. We don't have any elements on our page that are rendering them so that our users can see them, but they're still there, just kind of hiding in the background, ready for the app to potentially pull them out and do something with them, okay? So they still are there in our app, and as we've seen, okay, even though we can't see them via elements, we can access them with some very, very simple trickery using Chrome DevTools or similar programs, okay? So all of that data is living there. So where do privacy rules come in? Privacy rules act like a filter, okay? Pretend this is a privacy rule. A filter which every object, like this user, okay, that gets passed to the application, it has to pass through this filter, okay? And the privacy rule itself is going to say, I only want some of these fields to be sent through to the application. The rest of them have to stay behind. So we might have a rule that says, look, unless the user that you're sending is the user who's logged in, i.e., only let users see their own information, then the only field that's allowed to pass through here is the name. Okay, these guys have to stay behind. The date of birth and address have to stay behind, right? And then this guy can pass through. Okay, the rest can pass through. So that's what a privacy rule does. Technically, okay, this filter is actually happening here on the database. The database won't return, it won't release, rather, any fields that are not eligible to be sent through based on the privacy rule. Okay, but this is a useful illustration. Think about the privacy rule like a filter. A filter on the fields that are allowed to be sent from the database to our application. How we set that up in Bubble is via this data tab here. We've got this privacy tab here, okay? And we set a privacy rule for every individual data type, okay? We set the restrictions per data type. So for a user, we might define a new rule, okay? And we might call this the current user rule. So this rule needs a condition that is going to be asked to each of that data type. So in this case, for each user, this question is going to be asked. So the question that we might phrase, right, which is that we only want users to see their own information apart from the name. They can see the name for any user, but they can only see the date of birth and address for themselves, okay? So how we might write that rule is going to be where the current user is this user. So what that means is the current user, so the user who's currently logged into the application, when they are this user, so the user that we're actually asking the question about, okay, so is this user, as it comes from the database and it gets passed through to the app, we're asking this question, is this user the currently logged in user? If it is, boom, all of the fields can be sent through. Otherwise, fortunately, date of birth and address, well, I say unfortunately, it's actually quite fortunate. Those fields have to stay behind and the rest of the fields can be pulled through into the application. So that's what we're saying here when we are defining, okay, what fields or what can we see, what can we do with users who match this rule. So we can view all fields. We can find this in searches. We'll get to that one in a second. Attached files, we'll also briefly cover that one. Auto binding, we won't talk about today, but view all fields, okay? We can view all fields for this user. And now we're saying, okay, otherwise, everybody else, right? So if this user that we're asking the question about, that we want to send through to the app, if you are not the currently logged in user, then what can we do? What permissions do we have? Well, at the moment, we're saying we're not able to view any fields apart from the name. So that date of birth will be left behind. It will be filtered out by this privacy rule. The address won't be able to be sent through either. And I'm just going to click find this in searches for now as well. But we will return to what this means in a second. Okay. Now let's run this as Peter. Let's run the app as Peter here. Okay. So I'm going to go back and inspect the page here. Okay. So we know that we're logged in as Peter. So according to that privacy rule that we just set, we should only really be able to see the data, the date of birth and the address and that sensitive information for Peter. So let's have a look. Let's go into that M search. Let's look at the responses. Okay, let's have a look. Here's Peter, should be the third one in that list. So this is obviously indexed from 0. So this number 2 should be Peter. Yep, there it is, Peter. We can see his date of birth. We can see his address, right? Which is what we're expecting based on that privacy rule. Let's have a look at another one. Let's have a look at Sarah, okay? We can see that this is in fact Sarah. We're able to see the name. That makes sense, right? Remember in our privacy rule, we said that we're able to see the name for any user, okay? Anybody else except for the current user, we can see their name. Let's see, can we see anything else? No, we can't see anything else. We can't even see her email. So that date of birth, right, the address, that sensitive information, we can't see it for Sarah. We can't access it. It's been filtered out by this privacy rule that we defined, okay? So that's why privacy rules are so important. Now, another part of privacy rules that I sort of skimmed over there. Find this in searches, okay? Let me untick that for everybody else and see what happens. We're only getting Peter. So this, find this in searches, that says, you know what, look, if there are all of these users in the database and the app is saying, look, I want you to send me these users, so we're doing a search for users, okay? I only want you to find the users that meet this privacy rule, which essentially means you can't send back any users that don't meet the privacy rule. That's another way of saying it. So the privacy rule in this case is the current user is this user. So that's the only user, right? If we pretend this is Peter, this is the only user who's allowed to be sent back, who's allowed to be found in that search. It's as if these guys the rest of the users just get excluded based on this privacy rule, and only Peter is able to be returned. So looking at our app here again, if we look at this M search, we'll see that now we've only got one hit. See this one here? We've only got one hit. So one little packet of data that corresponds, if I untwirl these, it corresponds to Peter, okay? But if I have that on, then we are able to find all of the users, okay? We're able to find any user. It's just that we might not be able to see all of the fields for that user based on, what fields we've selected here. And if you're sometimes confused as to why things aren't showing up in your lists of things, in your searches, you can always inspect. You can always inspect here and you can see, look, actually Bubble is telling us that some of these fields we're not showing because of privacy rules. So that's sort of like a little hint. If you're not seeing the data that you're expecting to see, okay, it might not be a problem with your your search logic or your search constraints. It might be a problem with privacy rules. Your privacy rules are preventing that data from being retrieved from the database. Now, this is quite a simple privacy rule, okay? What we're also able to do with these rules is rely on the basic data relationships that exist already between our data. Let's say that on this page, okay, this is a continuation from the Task Manager app that we've sort of been dealing with in this course. Let's say we're going to have the tasks, like any tasks that are in this app. We want to display them here in this repeating group. So do a search for tasks, okay? So as before, I'll just add a text here which says the current sales tasks name and then who it's assigned to. So the assignees, and then for each assignee, I'm going to display their name here, their name. Okay, so here's all those tasks that we have in our database. Now let's say, right, this is quite a common thing that we might want to do. We only want to see tasks that are assigned to the current user, okay, where the current user is one of these assignees. So of course, you know, we could do a search for here only for tasks where the assignees, right, contains the current user, right? That's a perfectly valid way of restricting this. Okay, so this would be the case if you're building some kind of app where you might have like multiple companies, multiple clients, and you don't want them to see one another's data. Privacy rules are going to give you kind of an extra layer of security to make sure that that's not going to be possible. So in our case, it's tasks. We only want to see tasks that the user, the current user, is assigned to. Okay, so I might write a privacy rule here on the task object. Okay, because now it's tasks that we are defining here. So maybe this is the assignee rule, okay? And now in this case, we might say when this task's assignees contains the current user. Okay, so we're linking one object with another here. We're writing an expression that's going to be asked for every single task that we're going to be returning from the database. If that's the case, yeah, view all fields, find it in searches. If it's not the case, then pretend as though those tasks don't even exist. We don't want to see any tasks that don't belong to the user who's currently logged in. Okay, and of course, from the front end, it doesn't look any different because we had that search constraint already set. Okay, but we've got an extra layer of security now. It's good to have that extra layer because maybe we accidentally, right, while we're building, we don't set the search constraints correctly for some reason. Based on the search constraints, we might be receiving tasks that don't belong to the current user. But see how I just deleted that search constraint and the search itself doesn't look any different. If I look at the repeating group, you can see like there's only 1, 2 tasks being returned, okay? And that's because the privacy rule that we just wrote is preventing any other tasks from being returned here. Let's look at one more example. Let's say that, okay, a user should only be able to see their tasks, the tasks that they've been assigned to, or, okay, if you're a manager of a user, okay, then you're able to see any of the tasks for your users that you're managing. Okay, so a manager can see any of the tasks for the user that they're a manager of. We already have architecture here where a couple of our users, namely Rachel and Jason, they both have a manager, Sarah. Sarah is their manager. So we want to write a rule that lets Sarah see any of the tasks for Rachel and for Jason, right? Before we move on, let me just add that search constraint back as well. The assignees contains current user. Okay, so let's see if we can write this rule. So again, we want to write another rule here for a task, so manager, right? Because it's the task object that we're kind of thinking about here. And now, how might we write this? So when the task's assignees user is we don't really have the logic for that. Maybe where the current user's manager is this task. No, that doesn't quite work either because we don't have a relationship between the task and the manager. When this task assignees contains a user who is being managed by the current user, it doesn't really make sense. What we need here is to actually have a data relationship between a task object and a user object that captures this managerial relationship. We can't go 2 layers deep here. We can't kind of go from the task to the user to that user's manager, okay? We don't have that kind of flexibility with privacy rules. But what we could do is on a task, have a list of managers. A list of managers, which is a list of users, okay? And this is going to allow us to write that expression in exactly the same way as we wrote it for assignees, right? Here we're going to go when this task's managers contains the current user, okay? Then we can search for this, okay? Then we can find those tasks. And then the only thing that we have to do is create the corresponding logic, whereas whenever a user is assigned to a task, okay, their manager is also assigned to that same task. And then if the user is removed from that task or the assignees changes, then we need to have logic to also change the manager relationship at that same time, right? So the bottom line here is that we need to create a new relationship in our database between a task and a user, just so that we can use that relationship to write a particular privacy rule. Okay, that data relationship doesn't necessarily serve any other purpose. It might have other kind of secondary benefits, but the reason that we're making that relationship right now is primarily so that we can leverage it in creating this privacy rule. So keep that in mind. You sometimes will need to create this extra logic, these extra relationships, just so that you can base your privacy rules around them. Okay, and then the last little thing here, view attached files, that is basically what it says it is. So if you've uploaded files to an object, then if you have this ticked, then your users or your privacy rule here will allow users to view those files, otherwise it won't, okay? So that's privacy rules in a nutshell. Really critical part of building an app that you're actually gonna launch out in the world. Don't neglect them. Please don't neglect them. Use privacy rules, and you can then rest easy, as long as you set them up correctly, that you're not exposing any data that you shouldn't be.